It's my honor today to welcome you all to our webinar, and the title of which is History of Women Leading in the Fight Against against Sex Trafficking. And as we are all aware, March is National Women's History Month. So this perspective series is aimed at highlighting state and national trends in the work that survivors, service providers, activists, thought leaders, and government are doing to create an environment that's has thoughtful engagement for subject matter experts. Thus, the theme for this month is focusing on trafficking and women's history. And as we start this, we recognize that significant contributions to the work have been made by many different individuals. And we have the honor of welcoming three of them today. The first I'd like to introduce is Dr. Brooke Parker-Bello. Dr. Bello is a writer, teacher, actor, preacher, CEO, justice advocate, author, entrepreneur, visionary, curriculum developer, mentor, and founder of multiple organizations. She's a multiple award-winning social innovator who has distinguished herself with her works addressing different social issues, including human trafficking, sexual abuse, and mental health. Dr. Bello is intentional in her strive towards addressing critical societal challenges within the framework of Christian teachings, and the myriads of awards and recognitions she has received are testament to her conscious efforts designing her life for service to others. In 2016, Dr. Bello became a recipient of the prestigious Lifetime Achievement Award from the 44th President of the United States in the White House for her outstanding achievements. She was also awarded the Advocate of the Year by the Human Trafficking Council, held by the Attorney General Pam Bondi of the state of Florida, in addition to being recognized by the state of Florida under the administration of Governor Rick Scott for her excellent works in combating human trafficking. Next, we have Dr. Lawanda Ravora. Dr. Ravora serves as President Emeritus and promotes the Dolores Barr Weaver Policy Center's mission of advancing the rights of girls, young women, and those that identify as female, especially those in the juvenile justice system. Dr. Ravora focuses on advocacy and public policy, sharing the local work statewide, assisting to other communities working on similar issues, and connecting to a broader national network of stakeholders addressing issues of equity for girls and young women. She brings 25 years of experience that includes providing direct services to marginalized youth in both residential and community-based settings, leading reform initiatives, research, training, policy development, community organizing, and advocacy. She holds a doctoral degree in public administration from Nova University, a master's degree in allied health from the University of North Florida, and a bachelor's degree in sociology from the College of Charleston. Welcome, Dr. Ravora. And finally, we have Connie Rose. Connie Rose is the founder and executive director of Victims to Survivors US, a survivor-led nonprofit organization focused on eradicating human trafficking and filling the gap by providing supportive survivor services. Victims to Survivors US takes a community approach to addressing the social and public health crisis, and the creator of Community Conversations to Eliminate Human Trafficking, Get Help, Get Out, Post-it Note campaign, a survivor-led movement bringing together stakeholders and communities to start the conversation and work better in a collaborative incubator. She is a sexual abuse, sex trafficking, exploitation, and domestic violence expert, a veteran of the TEDx stage, what can you learn from a rubber band, and testifying before local, state, and national government, where she continues to campaign for legislative change, fighting to create global awareness of victim-centered crimes. She's a woman on a mission, breaking the silence one voice at a time, drawing on her personal journey of over 16 years of childhood sexual abuse, sexual exploitation at the hands of a serial sex offender, at the hands of a serial sex offender father, who was also her pimp. Her rare blend of style and substance has made her a highly regarded, sought-after international speaker, trainer, and consultant. And she's been bringing her years of experience to tens of thousands of individuals. Welcome you all to this panel discussion, and I'm really happy to have you here and have the opportunity to kind of facilitate. What we thought we would do is actually start out with Dr. Lawanda Ravora, and have her talk a little bit about kind of the history that has led up to Safe Harbor, and in particular in Florida, and how that has impacted some of the work.
Thank you, Michaela. And it really is an honor to be on this panel with each of you. So thank you for having me today. The Safe Harbor legislation in Florida, the first time that it was introduced in the Florida legislature was actually in 2010. And at that time, there were advocates who were presenting legislation that was based on what had happened in New York. And it was had a lot of good things in this legislation. And it would finally, in our state, begin to recognize victims, not as perpetrators, but as victims, as survivors. But as an advocate for girls and young women, I was not able to support this legislation, nor was the Children's Campaign, because there was a clause in the original legislation that called for and allowed victims of trafficking to be locked up involuntarily for their own good in what was called like safe houses. So these were safe houses or residential facilities where they were locked. They were not able to leave, and they were involuntarily placed there. And what we know from best practices, and certainly what I have learned from survivors, and certainly Connie Rose is one of my teachers who's on this panel, is that this begins to really replicate exactly what the pimp has done, taken away choice, uh, telling young girls that if you are caught, that you will be locked up. So even though there were many things in this legislation that we supported, we had to not support the passage of it until that was changed. And it took until about 2012 when House Bill 99 was actually introduced in the Florida legislature, and we had reached agreement to actually eliminate the language that would allow for involuntarily placing victims of trafficking in locked facilities. And so what was passed was landmark legislation. The state of Florida actually got it right. And we were deeming C-sect children, sex trafficked children, as dependent instead of as delinquent. And it gave the discretion to law enforcement to take young people that they had identified, to actually take them to safe houses. But what didn't happen in 2012 with the passage of this very good law was funding wasn't allocated to actually invest in community-based services that would give alternatives to police officers. So some of you may remember in 2013, there was a tragic situation that happened in Miami when a young girl who was actually in the custody of the Department of Children and Families was raped. And she had been placed in a safe house in Miami. And as a result of this horrific thing that happened, well-intended policymakers in 2014 brought forth legislation to really undo the safe harbor law that we had passed in 2012. And they wanted to go back to the idea of involuntarily locking up victims of trafficking, so for their protection. And it was well intended, but it wasn't based on what was best practices. And so the Children's Campaign at the time, as well as the Policy Center, really began to loudly speak out against this amendment to the safe harbor law. And we really raised concerns about due process. Young people were going to be involuntarily committed without even having any say-so or any due process. And so at that time, we did a very robust advocacy campaign to sustain the safe harbor law as it was written. And the Policy Center published a position paper called In Harm's Way. And at that point, that's where we really began to identify for the public and name what trafficking was. It was rape. It was child abuse. And the question for the state of Florida was, were we going to be a state that locked up victims of rape, that locked up victims of child abuse? And it really began to shift the conversation. And the Children's Campaign launched a public information campaign to really bring people forth to understand why this was a slippery slope, that this was not what was best practice, and that where we had failed was we had not invested in alternatives at the community level that were really designed to meet the needs of trafficking survivors, and that were really survivor-centered and survivor-led. And so it was during that time that we provided a great deal of testimony, and there were very few people who stood with us. Connie Rose was one of the people that stood with us, and at the time, it was Roy Miller, the president of the Children's Campaign, myself with the Policy Center, and Connie, and I remember one other social worker were the only people testifying against the amendments to the safe harbor law. So this was a tough battle, but we won that victory. And we were then invited to help write the legislation that even strengthened the safe harbor law. So we had new definitions for child abuse in the safe harbor law. We expanded the confidentiality of court records, and we also eliminated the time limits for criminal prosecution for human trafficking, and enhanced the penalties for those traffickers. But what we knew after 2014 is that we were going to continue to have to fight this battle unless we were successful in bringing community-based services throughout the state of Florida. And a young trafficking survivor who has also been my teacher, her name is Alyssa, she always said it shouldn't be luck when a trafficking survivor goes for services. It shouldn't be luck depending on what community that they're in. So what Roy Miller, president of the Children's Campaign, and I did was start crisscrossing the country to really learn from other communities. What were they doing? How were they addressing these issues? And what were the best practices that we could bring to Florida? So we went to Minnesota, New York, Georgia, Virginia, Tennessee. We traveled across the country. And that is the year 2015 that we published the concept paper for the Open Doors Network. And we really began to advocate for how could we create this robust network that was survivor-centered across the state of Florida. And in 2015, we secured the funding through the legislature. We had the support of the executive branch. We had the support of the Attorney General, as well as the legislative branch. And then in 2016, we negotiated the contract for Open Doors, and which is one of the reasons that we're here today talking with Voices for Florida, who then took that concept and we piloted it and expanded it across the state of Florida. So it's been a long history, but I'm really proud of the progress that we've made as a state of becoming a leader in this work.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that review, Dr. Ravora. Connie, I kind of wanted to move to you next. And I'm, as a survivor and a scholar, and also a service provider, your work has to bring you into contact with a wide variety of stakeholders. So can you tell us a little bit about what's been your driving force in doing this work?
Absolutely, and thank you. And my heart is so full to be on with Brooke and with Lawanda. So thank you so much. It's an honor to be here today. My driving force really started when I was a very, very young child. And as being a survivor of incest and pornography and domestic violence, and later of sex trafficking, I remember as a young child laying on my bed, on my ballerina bedspread. And I remember I grew up Catholic and Greek Orthodox, and later converted to Judaism. And I remember laying there and looking up, above my door, where there were two pictures, and one was of Jesus Christ and one was Blessed Mary. And I remember just looking, and as my father was doing what he was doing, and just praying and saying, like, why me? Like, why me? Like, I'm this little girl. Like, why me? And I remember, even now it's like within my bones. And I remember so vividly, basically God saying to me, with Mary kind of supporting him, my child, one day you will know, but we are here to protect you along the way. Now, some of you might wonder, that's like craziness, right? But for me, that started a belief system in me. And then in 1988, when my father was finally arrested for sexually abusing my stepsisters, I said, okay, this is my time. And that this is my time to use my voice. Had no idea what that meant or what that was going to look like. But it really started about having a very robust conversation of what is incest? And how does incest and pornography, how do they intertwine together? And then in 2010, when the aha moment finally came, because I was hiding this secret that for 4 years my father was trafficking me. I never jumped out of a cake, but I was the party favor. And in 2010, I was researching the ugly underbelly of Super Bowl and young girls, party favors. And I went, oh my goodness, that was me. And I finally found an answer. But what I also found is that we were starting to have these conversations about human trafficking in Florida, right? About sex trafficking. We were starting in Tallahassee to have very robust conversations. I met, Lawanda and Roy Miller, and really connected with some really powerful people that ensured in me that the message that I had to share was a really powerful message. And more importantly, I had that secret that I held for so many years, and I was not damaged goods, and that I could make a difference, and that standing alongside other individuals, other organizations, other folks to collaborate with and help really rise me up at that time, because I wasn't really sure. And so I share that with you because we're going to talk a little bit later about some other things. It is imperative that a lived experience expert, that is survivor, that voice is there. Because you see, for me, that was a driving force to make a difference, to walk alongside other individuals of why we have to not go along with legislation that was passed, like the Safe Harbor Act, but to stand up and say why this part of the legislation is wrong and this is why. And then to create things, like it was an honor to help create Open Doors and walk alongside and go down, that path. And then to see organizations like Dr. Brooke Bellows, she's going to talk about More to Life in a little bit later, right? To see other organizations really carrying out that mission that we worked so hard. So it's my heart, it's my passion.
Well, Connie, that's great. Thank you for adding that. And I'm kind of curious, have there been other people, other women that have blazed some of these paths that have really encouraged you along the way?
Well, there have been. So, I'm going to call it the movement, for lack of better terminology, right? But within this movement, there were some women that were in the forefront. So it was an honor to meet Rachel Lloyd. She was one of the very first, very strong, powerful voices, and continues to be. Courtney Fudd, Miriam Hatcher. These ladies, I looked up to them, because they were the first ones in the United States to really have, and I know there were others, and I apologize, but for me, they were the ones that gave me that inner courage to say, yes, my message, my voice, what I have to say has a lot of meanings. But more importantly, the side conversations that they had with survivors about, you aren't damaged goods, right? That you can make a difference, that you are making a difference. was very, very powerful. They were the pioneers. They laid the groundwork. This is my personal opinion. They laid the groundwork for the rest of us that have come along behind them, but also beside them.
And Connie, one kind of additional follow-up to that is, what advice do you have for other individuals, in particular, because we're focusing on Women's History Month, other women who are joining the work now?
Are you speaking about other women that are survivors or other women in general?
I think, specifically for survivors, but I think anyone who's interested in contributing to the work and with the skills that they have.
So I'm going to speak to survivors first. So one of the things that we do at Victim to Survivors is we walk alongside survivors, because so many survivors want to use their voice, right? They want to go out and do all these media interviews and training and testify in front of legislation and all that. And it's fabulous and it's wonderful, but we have to be really mindful about how do we do that? And that we have to be mindful that we aren't taken advantage of, and more importantly, that we're not re-exploited. And so for me, if I'm going to walk alongside a survivor that is just now starting their life over, because in a sense, that's what we have done. We have started our lives over again, to have a mentor. And it's okay to even have more than one mentor, and to have a mentor that is a fellow survivor, a sister survivor, or it could be a male survivor, but to have another survivor, and then to also have someone that is not a survivor, because you get both sides of the spectrum, right? You get the survivorhood spectrum, but then you get someone else that is a service provider, or someone like LaWanda, someone that has walked maybe a little bit different path. And why is that so important? Because we can kind of get all caught up in who we are and in our story. We can get caught up in, am I really good enough? Look what I did. How are they going to understand? And so with the survivors that I have worked with and that I will be working with in the future, for me, it's imperative to have a very, very strong mentor, and actually to have two mentors. But I'm going to talk to my brothers and sister survivors that are out there. You have a very strong message. And please, please make sure that you are healed and that you have done what you need to do to work through some of that trauma. And to know that there's going to be times in your life it's going to pop back up. Something's going to maybe remind you a scent, and that's okay. But here's what you do is you reach out. You reach out to me, you reach out to Brooke, you reach out to your mentor and say, hey, this is what's going on. And it's okay. But please, please know that you are strong, that you are powerful, and that we welcome you and your voice into this movement.
Thank you so much, Connie. I'm going to actually turn to Dr. Bello now. Dr. Bello, you have an incredible history and reputation in the human trafficking field, including your scholarship, your direct service work, and your personal journey. Can you tell us a bit about how you got into this work and what it's meant to you over time?
Yeah, I just wanted to just kind of lean into my hand and listen to LaWanda and Connie and just undulating emotions. And, I think, thank you, Robin, Metcalf. I know you're watching, and Roy, Joanne, and Michaela, Sam, everyone from Voices for Florida Open Doors, and to some of our team from all the partner organizations that are watching. All right, get some more training. As an actor in Hollywood, I was one of my dreams as a young girl before I was trafficked. I thought, at 6 years old, I'm going to be an actor and a scientist and a writer and all of these things. And I did have the opportunity to do some of those, but I had not healed. I had not shared what had happened to me. And I was addicted to drugs, and I was crashing and burning all over Los Angeles. And I thought, if you're going to pursue an extraordinary dream, when you achieve that goal, then everything is going to change. So you can push all of the pain, all of the trauma, all of the secrets, all of the rapes, all the trafficking, hidden down in a place, someplace in the ethers of your soul, and just move forward into an extraordinary destiny and not look back. Without any services, without any therapy, without any healing, you could just muster up enough gumption and do that. it's not possible. And in the midst of that dream, I recognized trafficking all over the place. And trafficking violers also recognized me. And it made it difficult for me to maneuver when I was asked certain questions or playing certain roles. And so in the process of acting, I said to myself, there's got to be more to life. The TO was taken, so we settled for the 2 zeros. It is not really a grammatical error, it's on purpose. And that's what happened. And so I got into the work because I survived early childhood rape and molestation and then trafficking for a handful of years, which was multiple rapes, addiction, and violence. And, in the brothel that we were in, without saying too much, there were kids there even younger than me, 11, 12 years old. There were boys there. One of my best friends in the brothel was a young boy named Dale. And it's amazing what happens in the process that finally you wake up one day and someone, Connie spoke about mentors. LaWanda hasn't yet, but she gave sort of an idea that there are some there. She did mention Roy. My mentor, my very first mentor is Pastor Bam Crawford, was a pastor in LA who would help women that were involved in sexual violence. And she encouraged me to start this sort of process of More to Life when I explained it. And then Dr. Barbara Skinner in Washington, DC, of Skinner Leadership. Her mentor is Maya Angelou. And 3 days before Maya Angelou died, she said, remember to have joy. She wrote that in a book to me. And so many, many women, many, many mentors, male and female, actor John Voight, have really helped me from different demographics, from different walks of life, from different political views, just human beings that have spoken to my life in a special way to not give up and to move forward. I suffered profound depression, so I didn't know. I'm getting teary-eyed. This rarely happens anymore. Maybe it's, I don't know, something about you, Michaela. But I think that survivors sometimes suffer things that they don't want to always share, whether it's an anxiety, depression, a certain appetites to things that you hold privately with your therapist that you have to get past and move beyond to deal in the real world with all of the cultural adversities, with persons thinking that, working at Starbucks is okay. Yeah, you're doing it, but you have such a bigger dream. Oh, you've got your GED, great. Now you can work at Chick-fil-A, great. When you actually want to own a corporation or go into science or go into med school. And so the process of the work we do at More to Life really is to galvanize the intelligence and getting past soul assassination to really mitigate the issues of trauma by launching survivors, victims to survivors, survivor to thriver, thriver to champion, into a destiny with the balanced well-being. And it takes a lot of work. And so I got into the work, and probably I was halfway healed when I got into the work. And then the process of providing services created just an undulating aspect, a perpetual healing more and more. In Florida, I actually co-wrote Office Bill 369, which was the first signage bill that was going on all around the country and spoke before the Senate, in addition to House Bill 465, and spoke before the Senate to get those passed. And House Bill 465 is relegates that any buyer of anyone for sex had to take mandatory education, had to pay certain fines, had to be held accountable logistically in order to move and create and push this movement forward in Florida. When I heard about the Open Doors Outreach Network, More to Life had already been around for 12 years, a little bit more. And I had met Roy Miller, in Tallahassee. He's like this amazing, philanthropic, intelligent guy. He was telling me about Garden Ad Litem, Healthy Start, all these things that he had done, and about Open Doors. And I thought, you know what? I've always believed in collective impact. I'd love to be a part of that. I think that, Mick, winding it up, I think that as a woman of color, it's harder for all women, but women of color even more. I mean, we didn't even get the right to vote until 1964. Our voices meant zero. And even if you go into Silicon Valley or you're pursuing to get funds for a company, even a nonprofit, you get about 60% less than someone else that's non-Black, non-person of color. And so in Florida, demographically, I knew when I came from California that it was going to be harder. Being biracial, being married to an incredible Irish Italian, being someone who believes in a diversity and inclusion, and wanting to unify cultures and races and people and male and female. That's my thing. That's my wonk. That's what I do to help push back on pedophilia and rape and human trafficking. And so I knew this would be a great state to do that in my work already in Washington, D.C. with TVPA, with Chris Smith and individuals, Marion Hatcher, Vanita Carter. Those are people, Rachel Moran, those are people who pushed me and said, you have got to do this. Please don't be afraid. Elizabeth Scaife, even, with Shared Hope, before Shared Hope. So when Open Doors came around, I said a big fat prayer. I was like, God, if you can do anything, and I also planned, I would love to be a part of Open Doors. I think providing services initially in Sarasota County and Bradenton and Tampa, but then doing massive stuff around the nation and other parts of the world, in Singapore, in the mountains of Philippines with the militia, taking down their guns. I'm in the jungle talking about human trafficking and incest. Don't do that there. American Samoa and Guam and up in Chuuk in the mountains. And so it came around where we applied and we were chosen. And I think that's a testament to Voices from Open Doors, because we were not the largest organization that applied. But they looked at the schematic of the work. They looked at the sort of your framework model, your passion, your case management system, really delved through the application and thought, is this organization going to be a team player? Are they going to be it for the long haul? Are they going to, there's no big I's or little U's. Are they going to bring their intelligence into the mix? And, knock on wood, because my desk is wood, it's stuck. I want to say that in the times we're living in, providing services is profoundly exhausting and tiring. The issues and the violences that we're coming up against are really dark and severe. We know that poverty brings destruction, that cultural imbalances bring more violence and trauma. And so the aspect of Open Doors, the aspect of collective impact that is a backbone, is not the only backbone of our organization. We have federal grants and we have private donors, but the collective intelligence that we all bring to the table to push along this initiative is extremely important to me. And there's some incredible stories that we have out of and through all the partnerships. My final wonk, and one of the challenges, not with Open Doors, just in the movement as a whole, we're coming into this place where in the age of information, we are plagued with data. And oftentimes, and Connie knows this, that you'll go to a survivor and you'll aggregate data. Lawanda's talked about it, the data that you get from the intelligence of a survivor. Yet that survivor is never upheld in a way where they understand the profound intelligence, the intellectual property rights, the copyright law, the power of what they hold, because out of pain and trauma comes an extraordinary sort of phoenix from the ashes. And in the age of information, it is a valuable commodity. And I think there is a way to support survivors, understanding all is not lost in the abuse if you're 6 feet above ground. You have knowledge that no one else has, and you can use that and relegate that in other areas and systems within community and within our world. And that's what we pursue to do at More to Life. That's what I hope that we bring to the table as one of the providers of the Open Doors Outreach Network. And as a woman of color, as a BIPOC individual, teaching other women and young girls the importance of their voice. And I like to say, coming out of the angry vagina. I have this thing, they have vagina monologues. I had an angry womb for a long time, or an angry vagina. My work with HHS and my work with DOJ talks about dealing and healing wombs and what women bring and how to get past that, to to have a vibrant, healthy body that catapults us forward. And so I know probably the other ladies might have shared a little bit longer, but I think that was good if that's okay, because I can
Yeah.
share.
Well, we appreciate it. And I always appreciate your passion and sharing everything that you do. And I wanted to kind of let folks know that we are accepting questions via the chat function. And so if you have some questions, we'll have one at the very end as well. But I do encourage you, if you want to jump in. Some people are saying, thank you so much, Dr. Bello, for sharing. Just to kind of switch directions a little bit, I kind of like to go back to what you believe have been some of the fundamental governmental policies that have influenced the way that we serve survivors of sex trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation in Florida. Dr. Rivora, obviously, you know, we started that conversation talking about safe harbor. But what other things do you think have been really fundamental and you as experts in the field have observed to be particularly effective here?
Well, obviously, safe harbor was a landmark legislation for the state of Florida, and protecting safe harbor and continuing to build on it to make sure that we are listening to survivors and that the policy is really informed by the lived experience of providers is critically important. I think there are policies that we need to change in the state of Florida. So I would really like to take a little bit of time to talk about that. And one of the policies that the Dolores Bar-Weaver Policy Center is very concerned about is the misuse of the sexual abuse registry. And what we are seeing, we know that traffickers are clever in making sure that they are using the victim's phone. Often if the person that they are exploiting has a car, they'll use their car in order to do the trafficking. They put the name of the hotel in that of a victim. And so when arrests are made, what we are seeing, there can be incidences where victims of trafficking are actually being charged with trafficking. And then you have a host of evidence against them. And so when they are convicted, they, in addition to what is an inappropriate conviction, because it is it's part of the victimization that's happened to the individual, they are then having to register with the sexual abuse registry, which not only do they have a criminal record that they shouldn't have, they now have to register with the sex registry, which impacts their ability for housing, their ability for education, their ability for employment, and it impacts the rest of their lives. So that is a piece of legislation that we are advocating for changing. It's not that we are opposed to the sexual registry for perpetrators, but its misuse for victims and survivors of trafficking just continues to victimize and traumatize. And so that is an area of concern. I think we've also made progress, though, in the state of Florida through funding programs like the Open Doors Network and recognizing that it is survivor-centered. A lot more work needs to be done there. And I think it's what Brooke and both Connie were talking about in terms of valuing that voice of the survivor and it having equal or even more importance than other people who are in this work. And one of the reasons that as we were trying to address getting funding for Open Doors, and we would hope that that would obviously that the funding would continue and that it would expand to where we have the network in every county in the state of Florida. But the concept of Open Doors was grounded in really listening to survivors. And I would want to see more of that, not only in the Open Doors Network, but throughout all services that are provided to survivors of trafficking. And we're also advocating to continue the training across the continuum, from teachers to clinicians to police officers to judges to state attorneys, all across the system. We are advocating that the state of Florida continue to invest and invest more to make sure that there is an understanding from the perspective of the survivors, but also that we're making decisions where we're not arresting individuals who are victims. And so it's important that we have this training so that the safe harbor law is really implemented across the state of Florida in the manner that it was written and the intention of safe harbor. And there's still work to be done in that area.
There's I think that are a couple relevant questions that have been submitted, in particular from, and please forgive me if I'm mispronouncing the name, Jamaro Johnson. They asked two questions. One is, why do you think it's so difficult to obtain adequate funding with the legislation, which I think Dr. Rivora, you were kind of talking about that a little bit. And they say, I found that they will pass legislation, but won't provide the provisions needed for the legislation to be effective. And then second, this is a very specific question. They said, how do you all feel about legislation preventing traffickers, defense attorneys from deposing minor victims of trafficking in state court? Florida is one of several states that allow this practice. I've been working with some folks to change this. Does anybody have any comments or questions about that?
Can you repeat the second part of the question again?
Sure. It says, how do you all feel about legislation preventing traffickers' defense attorneys from deposing minor victims of trafficking in state court? Florida is one of several states that allow this practice. I've been working with some folks to change this.
Did you ladies, I can go, but you guys can take it first. Lawanda, Connie, did you have?
Yeah, mine will be really brief because you work more with minors than I do at this point. But I work alongside with Natasha from Redefining Refuge, and we just had a very, very robust conversation about this. And why do our minors, why do our youth have to be deposed and their traffickers are there? Why can we not do what they do for sexual violence? You know, when you have a child that's been sexually violated, that forensic investigator does it in a private room with the video camera, with wraparound therapeutic services, and they are not facing their perpetrator. And so I'm going to open up with that, and then Brooke, take it over.
Yeah, thank you, Connie. Good question, Jamaro, and good to see you on here from South Florida. I think that, you know, based on what Connie said as well, unfortunately, not all judges, prosecuting attorneys and attorneys understand and relegate human trafficking to the type of violence it really is. We know that only 6% of rapes in the United States really go to trial. There's a huge article in HuffPost about this a couple of years ago, and less than that actually are prosecuted where rapists go to jail. And so with trafficking, there's often no forensic evidence. It is after the fact. And so there's this idea, and Lawanda kind of spoke to this in terms of safe harbor, where you still kind of see that child as part of the problem, because consciously, oftentimes that minor wanted to consciously be there, but not subconsciously. They were made and groomed to desire to be there or told to be there. And sometimes it's difficult for individuals to wrap their head around that idea. The younger, I'll tell you this, you will see less DEPO nationally and in Florida, you see less DEPO minor participants when they are under the age of 14, even 13. You'll see some of the move to do it just as rape and sexual violence victims. And so we have to, I believe, Jamaro, change how we look at the spectrum of age in Florida and around the nation. We can't look at a 15-year-old or 16-year-old who might look to some like a young adult woman. She's not, and she shouldn't have or can't say yes. And under, Florida statute and federal statute, it's a crime. And so we have to wrap our heads around what the meaning of a child is again. And I want to say that one of the answers, obviously, and not to plug VR eval, but it'll be coming out in the next 1.5 to 2 years. We have to do things like virtual reality and artificial intelligence, where survivors can be completely out of the courtroom, be seen someplace in a virtual space, no matter where they are, not even having to travel. And we have to sort of bring technology into the mix in the courtroom more and more as we iterate in this movement.
Yeah, and Kayla, I would just support what both Brooke and Connie are saying. This process can become re-traumatizing, re-victimizing, and take away the choice of the young person. The other part of the question, in terms of the funding, why is it so hard? I think as a state, we have a lot of work to do to fund all children's programs. And we certainly are not investing as much as is needed to support children across the system, and much more needs to be done with trafficking. And I think that we still, as a state and as a culture, are struggling with blaming the victim. And people have really, I think Brooke kind of alluded to it, there is still this, she made a choice to stay, or why didn't she run? And we have the blaming and the shaming of victims. And so much work needs to be done in terms of educating the public, as well as educating policymakers about what happens with the grooming and the captivity of the survivors of trafficking. And so there's a lot of work to be done, and we have to continue to advocate for the investment in all of our children. And Florida is woefully behind in that.
If I can add really quickly to the funding piece, Michaela, really quickly. Lawanda's right on the point, and as well as Connie, what she said earlier. We have an issue with diversity and inclusion in Florida. We have an issue with bigotry and racial challenges in our nation as a whole. And sometimes, because of cultural differences, and sometimes withstanding not on purpose, right? But you can look at a young Black girl who may look like a gang member. She just doesn't look like a victim to you. And the certain theories in finance don't really work. I spoke to some legislative leaders, and they said, well, isn't human trafficking services, when you get to a certain age or a certain point, kind of like welfare? And we want to stay away from giving handouts. And I'm like, well, not exactly, because of trauma, because of the perpetration of trauma on that life, that child has become something that they didn't aspire to, something they weren't born to. And so to you, they just look like an addict. They just look like maybe a gangbanger. They just look like a young girl who wants to be there, very angry, probably doesn't speak well, doesn't present well, but that's not who she really is or who she's born to be. And I think that with trafficking coming out of too, sort of the gang influence in Florida and around the nation, we have to sort of take a step back and work with legislators to say, this isn't welfare. It may appear to be welfare because, yes, she was locked up in juvenile detention. And yes, he, threw a desk in school. And yes, he got in trouble for stealing, a candy bar. And yes, he cursed out this case manager. And yes, they ran away like 15 times. But look at what happened before that. They were raped 15, 20 times, twice a day, 10 times a week, over and over again. Do you understand what that causes? And so I think funding tomorrow will take place more and more when we can wrap it around the stories of individuals in a way that's palatable and palpable for legislative leaders to swallow, for congressional leaders to swallow, and for funders to swallow.
And I'd like to piggyback on that, and I'd like to talk a little bit about our adult survivors. because Brooke, you just kind of laid the groundwork, because we also need funding for adult survivors. Because just because you've turned, I'm going to say once you turn 21, it's like, oh, the light bulb was supposed to go off and you are no longer a victim of what happened to you. Right. But let's go to our survivors. Let's go. And I work with a lot of survivors that are 50 plus, and they are being re-victimized over and over and over again. With COVID, a lot of them have gone back in for lack of resources. What they know is love. There's an exchange, right? Sex, there's an exchange. It's something that I could do. But more importantly, that trauma, we like Brooke said earlier, we have learned how to kind of departmentalize, how to pack it where it belongs. We know there are times it goes here, and then there are times it will flare up, right? What are we doing about that? We don't have funding sources to really support survivors that have been out of the life for X amount of years. We don't have funding sources for that. And if we don't find funding sources for those survivors, remember, their parents, their grandparents, what is going to happen to those generations? So just going to put that on the table for a moment.
And Connie, I have to just mention that even in the next Perspectives series that we're having, the focus is actually on, in honor of Mother's Day, really looking at mothering and the impact of trafficking on mothers and their children as well. So I think that's really interesting. And I know, Dr. Bello, you often talk about the two-gen and the intergenerational impacts of trafficking. So I think that'll be really interesting. I want to kind of go back to one thing that Chanel Dion, and Chanel is joining us from the Dolores Barr-Weaver Policy Center. And she says, I feel like the conversation on the concept of locking up victims is coming back up again. I meet with stakeholders all the time, and it seems as though they feel we are running out of options to support victims. And the answer is now to lock up victims, quote, for their safety. I'm not sure that I have an answer, just would like to hear your insight on this.
I think that this is a cycle we constantly battle. And it is because it really gets back to the lack of investment in services across the state. And this work is difficult. And it really, if we think about what happened in the domestic violence movement, we used to say the same thing about women. Well, they return to their abuser. So we need to, lock them up, or we need to take away their choice because they can't make these decisions for themselves. And I think as a state and individuals want a simple answer instead of recognizing we really have to invest in services that reflect the needs of survivors. And we have to recognize our open doors is called open doors for a reason. It is, the door is open. It never closes. There is not a closed door, because healing is going to take time. And just as Connie has alluded, and Brooke as well, the trauma doesn't go away. It just, it softens, it may show up at different times. And this is a healing journey that takes a very long investment. It's not something that happens in 6 weeks or in 45-minute sessions, 5 days, 5 weeks or something like that. It is a journey, and we have to be willing to have the open door to walk alongside. But as a state, we also have to invest in the long-time services. And we have to continue to educate the public as to why locking up survivors of trafficking is not the answer. We've tried it in so many different ways, in terms of with domestic violence, with substance abusers. We continue to want this magic formula, and it's not, and it's something that we need to really invest in the services that are needed. And we have to be vigilant about monitoring safe harbor and making sure that our public policy doesn't shift and go to take away the rights of anyone, and particularly victims of rape and victims of violence.
When we look at the safe harbor and the locking up really quick, I want to thank Catherine Fernandez Rundo in South Florida, because we're the first anti-trafficking agency that was in Sarasota County, and we have a buyer program, and now we're seeing federal traffickers post-incarceration, and about 30% of the men that go through the course, in partnership with the Advocate Program, Dr. Isabel Perez there, have been violated as children. So it's not just, I want to say, just victims, but it's also the creation of perpetrators that haven't gotten the services they need because these men didn't feel they had a safe place to fall. And we're like, you're 30, 40 years old and you're just now sharing for the first time what happened to you with your grandfather when you were a boy. But we've had instances with More to Life and even some of our Open Doors Network team in Tampa Bay, and in partnership with Judge Ballman and other leaders there, there'll be a victim in court. And because of Safe Harbor, that sort of public defender that she has says, well, she's 15, Safe Harbor, we can't keep her here. We can't lock her up. We can't even hold her here. So she walks out the door to that trafficker, that violator, that person, which is a part of their unhealthy social capital. And so one thing that has to happen is there has to be some type of safe harbor hold. If you're a minor in a situation where there is perceived trafficking and identified known trafficking, we created something with our More to Life and Open Doors partnerships there in Tampa Bay, where they call us to sort of see her as she's walking out of the courtroom. And it's almost like we're like a sales team. We're like, hey, young lady, we're here as a part of the Open Doors Outreach Network, and we really want to help you. Can we walk you to the car? And we're walking, Michaela, everyone, we're walking this young woman to the car, giving her a card, and sometimes they stop and cry, and we're able to provide services. But there has to be somehow a hold. Marion Hatcher said it this way. Marion Hatcher said her incarceration, and you know her, Connie, said that law enforcement at a period of time in her life was angels with handcuffs. And I was like, Mary, that's true. And that was right for her. She was in her 20s. We're really talking about minors here. And so with minors, there are no angels with handcuffs. You're not an adult who has gone through the same issues and you're addicted to heroin and coke. And so there has to be some safe holding space so that we can, because she is a minor, and if she's a community kid, just the propensity, the ability to be able to have a day or an hour or 24 hours to be able to bring them into care in a healthy way. If not, there's a challenge there.
And I think, Brooke, that's exactly what I'm talking about. It's why Open Doors was designed to be real time, not get on a waiting list, not we'll make an appointment and see you tomorrow, but at this moment and it would be the survivor mentor, ideally, with other team members if needed, who would go and see that young person in this moment and would be there, hold their hand. I remember when Roy and I went and we were touring places across the country. One of the things that really stuck with me was a young girl was in crisis. She had been identified as a trafficking victim, and the survivor that was part of the network of where we were doing this visitation stayed the night with her. This kid was put in a foster home, and the survivor spent the night on the couch, talking all night with this young person who wanted to run. But she just needed something to interrupt the crisis that she was in. And it was the survivor who spent the night, stayed up all night, was on the couch, was talking, and was able to keep her grounded enough to where she was then by morning ready to accept the services. And so I think it is the importance of investing in the availability of having that person there when the survivor needs it or when the victim needs it?
I will say, just from the perspective from Voices and working with Open Doors, one of the things that I love telling people about Open Doors is that we don't have a beginning and we don't have an end to our services. And the way that we work with our populations, we expect people to come in and out. And we have an ability to kind of work with that and then also welcome people back when they're ready, and knowing that and anticipating that, as opposed to thinking if we were out of touch with a survivor, or something didn't work, that's necessarily a failure, because it's really looking at a longer term commitment from our team members and the bonds that they create. I wanted to read one comment that Rhonda Shoup has sent to the panelists. She says, trafficking victims and sexual abuse victims need help to work through the trauma. They need resources. If these young people aren't able to get the resources, then they could become adult victims of domestic violence. This keeps the cycle of violence going due to the trauma. Victims need help and resources. Do any of you have any response to that comment?
That's what we do. That's exactly what Lawanda and Connie and I have been talking about. I think, I had a meeting with the team at a training the other day, and this is our Open Doors team, our entire team. Some are paid through our Open Doors contract, some with the Department of Justice, donors. It's like a hodgepodge of these amazing individuals. And we're so glad that we get to be a part of Open Doors and all the other work that we do. But in having a meeting with the team and unifying and working on not duplicating services and looking at resources and finding out how to do that, one aspect was speaking to Lawanda's point. We see sometimes that it's the survivor mentor with the regional advocate. It depends on where the victim is mentally and emotionally. Sometimes a survivor mentor is the very last person they should meet, because sometimes they can't hear anything at all about trauma. They just want to hear resources from someone who's going to say, here's what we can do for you. We can feed you, we can clothe you, we can house you. But I think that at More to Life, we have this sort of process where we go from urgent to primary to sustainable. When our survivors get to sustainable, oftentimes they no longer want to hear from the survivor mentors as much. They don't necessarily want to hear from regional advocates, clinicians, or any of our staff, because now they're like, wait a minute, I have a job right now. I have my own place. And I'm, squeaky wheel gets the oil, and I don't think I have a squeaky wheel right now. 3 months down the line, there's a date rape. There's an argument with someone at work. There's a problem that causes them to crash and burn. Now they're not on sustainable. They're not even primary. They're going all the way back to urgent and feeling like giving up and going back to addiction. And so I think resources is really looking at how are you applying resources at different stages of the spectrum of their healing, because there comes a point when they no longer need to regurgitate or hear the word trafficking. They no longer need to hear survivor mentor. They no longer want to even hear survivor for a while. They just want to work. They just want to grow. They want to learn how to code. They want to learn how to build websites. They want to learn how to supplement their income. And so we have to be thinking of, and we're doing that, resources. We're doing that with Open Doors. We're doing that as More to Life. We're doing that in our partnerships. How do we provide the kind of resources that are cutting edge, moving them forward, where they understand, okay, now that you're unsustainable, we're going to begin to assist you. And Michaela and I were having this because we're looking at grants and writing grants and, oh my gosh, but looking at how do we enhance the services so now you can wonk on education. Now you can wonk on career guidance. And what are the different resources that you need? So you're guided by a survivor mentor, but that survivor mentor has connected with a community partner who's going to mentor in business or mentor in coding or mentor in graphic design or mentor in communication and so on. And so we have to rethink the different spectrums of service provision.
And I would add to that, I think the power of Open Doors is meeting the individual absolutely where he or she is. And that plan is individualized and tailored and revamped as the person grows or needs more or needs less. But aligned with that is also the focus of the advocates who are paying close attention to policy and how public policy impacts the individual lives of the people that we are serving. And I think sometimes there's a disconnect with that. And it's not either or, it's really and, that we have to pay attention to public policy. We need people to become advocates with us in making sure that we have the types of public policy that we need that supports the health and well-being of survivors in their education, in their employment, in their health, in their well-being. And so I just want to make sure that it's the importance of the direct service, and of equal importance is that we have the underpinning of really good public policy.
And that actually works really well into our next to last question, which was, what do you see on the horizon for prevention and intervention in sex trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation?
Well, I'll start, and then I know that there's going to be a really great, robust conversation around this. But I had the honor to sit in a couple different powerful meetings over the last 24 hours, and it was, when I say this, please don't take it the wrong way, it was enlightening to me to hear that one of the areas for us to start in prevention is to have conversations, and Brooke, you kind of alluded to this earlier, with the perpetrators. And here's why. So in my story, my father was my perpetrator, right? He was the number one perpetrator. As a child, he is the one that trafficked me. It took till 2008, when he was basically on his deathbed in the last 9 months of his life, that I actually learned what happened to him, and that he was raped at 13 years old over a porn magazine. Now, back when that happened, right, that porn magazine was like looking at the lingerie section of Sears catalog or Victoria's Secret. And I share that with you because then he came forward and he said to me, why are people not listening to people like me, that look what happened to me? Not that it was an excuse for what I did, but I needed help, and I still need help, because he was still a pimp at 82 years old. And so the conversation in the last 24 hours is about us addressing, and I'm going to say our youth, but also addressing our youth that are at risk of becoming perpetrators, but then the individuals that are already the buyers, the individuals that are already the traffickers, that are the perpetrators, and educating them. Because one of the other things that my father said to me was, I know what I did was wrong. I had no idea the ramifications it was going to have on you for the rest of your life and my grandchildren. And that's a message that perpetrators and traffickers need to hear, but they also need to have their own trauma addressed. So I'll start with that. Now you can take it over.
Lamont, did you want to go first?
No, you can go ahead, Brooke.
Okay. I guess I will. Okay, so really quickly, I love prevention, Mick. I hope you don't mind me calling you that. I just love saying Mick. It's just so nice. But Michaela, I think that, I created some software called Coming Home, and we've launched it, a soft launch, a case management system and mobile app, and people are really like freaking out and loving it so much. And it's really not about me, because I didn't create it for me to make any money. I created it in the process, I'm actually planning my succession plan, meaning, I can't do this work for another 20 years, obviously. And I need to pour out of me everything that's in my heart, on my passion to others, other mentees, other survivors, other leaders, other people. And I was shocked that as a survivor, as a champion, because I really don't like the word survivor, prefer thriver champion, getting past surviving. But I was surprised that only sort of close constituents and people outside of Florida really sort of are rallying around it, where other people are like, if you have a survivor of human trafficking that has walked on science, a childhood dream, and is able to move something forward, you can't celebrate that. That's an issue. And so prevention, in terms of baseline, is going to happen at first when we realize the magnitude of the issue and the value and the power of catapulting survivors and their move forward in life, as LaWanda and I were talking about earlier. Also, in the innovation of technology and virtual reality in terms of service provision, we all saw during COVID, Mick, that some survivors responded so well. They could Zoom all day. They just felt safe and they felt this anonymity. And it's true, introverts become more extrovert in conference calls, in Zooms, and in virtual reality. And so we have to utilize that. And finally, as Connie was saying, we have something, I want everyone to watch Black and Missing on HBO later this year. I'll have Voices of Florida send out a notice. But I actually interviewed one of the human traffickers in our program. If he messes up, he goes back to prison for 30 years. And this 29-year-old man saw his sister raped from 3 to 5, saw his mother get stabbed 7 times, grew up in the Bronx. His father was a drug dealer. He went to prison. All of these things. So him becoming a trafficker was sort of, it happened via being a gang member. And so we do have to really bring in the boys and the men on a high level, the buyers, the traffickers on a high level. Restorative justice has to take place. We have to galvanize technology, and we have to have our organizations be honest about, your numbers were great today because she's working, but you did not put that data that's 6 months down the line, she lost that job. And now she's homeless again. And so how do you get her, he, she, we, they, to catapult them forward? Because it's going to be all about prevention, all about reducing demand, all about ending human trafficking.
And I think I would just piggyback on what Brooke is saying. It's about reducing demand. And I think we have to look at what are the cultural messages that we are giving that says a child or an adult is for sale. And so I think until we address the cultural messages and the cultural acceptance of sexualizing children, of sexualizing women and men, that I agree that I believe that we have to hold perpetrators accountable, but also we have to understand what's driving that behavior. And I don't think we can take it out of the context of the cultural messages.
Thank you all so much for reflecting on that. As we are kind of winding our way down through this, there is one last question that I kind of would like to ask you all to answer, and it's really based on kind of our theme for this month and really kind of how we close. And my question is that what do you think are some good ways to honor the history of yourselves and the many, many other individuals who have contributed to this work that would really do it justice? So what are some ideas that you have?
I think getting to know each other better. I think that in the space of human trafficking, there's a sweat and there's a grind. It's hard work and it's rewarding work. And women, I thought, growing up probably that men were workaholics. You see men, the sweat of the brow, but it's like, oh snap. Women are so hardworking and so diverse. And someone said to me, are you multitasking today? I'm like, there's no such thing. I'm multi-messing. I'm multi-messing at high levels. I think that we hear things, we do things. If we're going to, I always tell the team at More to Life, you can't teach what you're not doing. you can't teach above the capacity of your own understanding. And you can only share, but for it to truly resonate and engage, you have to be experiencing it as a modality in your heart, and you have to be living that experience. And I think we have to get to know people before we judge them. You know, there's a lot of sort of close niches and cliques within this movement. We need to cut down all of the walls. We need to get to know each other as women and really relate in a way that shows that we all have a significant role to play, a significant part to play, that we need each other desperately. There are no big guys or little yous. We have gifts differing, and together we can shred some mountains like never before. We have to not operate in bigotry and judgments and perceptions because we are human. We're not always well emotionally. We have issues. If you want to know, look at yourself in the mirror. But if we come together in honesty, I think we can do more than together than apart.
I would share from my perspective, it's always honoring those whose shoulders that we stand on. And I feel in my many years of doing this work, it is the girls and young women that I have been privileged to walk alongside of, who have been my greatest teachers. And in fact, with the Policy Center, when I founded the Policy Center, our tagline is "See the Girl." And that actually came from Maria, who's a young girl that I met when she was incarcerated, who had a history of just unbelievable victimization and sexual abuse. And no one had ever asked her what happened to her. She was just, as a child, going in and out of the juvenile justice system. And when I asked her, I was on my way to Tallahassee when I stopped and met with a group of girls. And I asked what they wanted me to tell the politicians and the policymakers who had the power to change what happened to girls and young women in the justice system. And this brilliant 14-year-old little girl, she was so tiny, her socks wouldn't even stay up on her ankles. They just kept falling down. She said, "Tell them to see me for who I am, not who they think I am, to see me for who I can become." And I will never forget it. It changed my life. And so I think by simply honoring those who are our teachers, and if we do this work in an ethical way, and it honors those who have helped us along the way, who have lifted us up, and I think it's our responsibility to lift up others.
Wow. Yeah. I'm just like blown away at the moment. It is, it's going on. And when I say it's not so much the backs of those that came before us, but it is in a sense. You know, for me, as I was listening, my grandmother is sitting here with me right now. And my grandmother's been dead since I was 30 years old. Okay, so it's been a very long time. And for some, she's like just sitting here and she's just saying to me, you know, sweetie, this is why you went through what you went through. And with that, she was one of my greatest teachers. So I think it's for us to look at, you know, the survivors that we work with, the other individuals that we work with. Brooke, you said it so beautifully. You know, we are human, right? We are women, we are females, we are human. And at the same time, though, we have to be each other's greatest supporters. And I'm going to say this, you know, what happens in the forefront in meetings and, oh, we all love each other, that's beautiful. But where the real support happens is behind the closed doors. It's picking up the phone and saying, hey, you know what, I know that we're both service providers and we're both survivors, and I have a problem. Can you walk me through what's going on right now? You know, it's about building those kinds of relationships that we know that we really do have each other's back. And my personal opinion is that when we really do that, we will move so many more mountains than we have already moved.
Well, on behalf of Voices for Florida and our participants, we've just been getting a flood of great feedback and thank yous. I want to say thank you to each of you for joining us. There are a lot of individuals who contribute to this work, and we felt particularly supported by the three of you and led by the three of you. So we're very grateful to have you here. For those of you who are participating and curious about recording, it will be available on our website and in some other areas in social media. And then at the conclusion, we'll actually be sending out an evaluation. So you are welcome to send that out, or excuse me, to return that. It's anonymous and it helps guide us in our further perspectives, et cetera. And also, if you have any additional questions or wanting to reach out to someone, you are more than welcome to contact us at Voices for Florida. If you go to our website, you'll find our contact information there, and we can certainly share additional information for our panelists today. So with that, I will say good afternoon and happy Women's History Month, and thank you so much for joining.